And now AGS Chairman Dr. Chris Tucker is going to moderate a panel that we've named The Future of Surf and Turf, How the Midwest Can Have It All. Chris?
That's right. I was going to call it some riff on hibachi, and you'll find out in a minute why. Thanks so much, John, for giving us the stage. I have the distinct pleasure to hang out with two very fascinating people today. We always like to mix it up a little bit at the AGS. So one of our truly inspiring speakers from the fall at our New York City event from Mexico was willing to come back and share his message with our group here in St. Louis today. Daniel Russek, who's CEO of Atarraya. I did not roll my R correctly with that, and my Spanish teacher would be very embarrassed for me. And then Dr. Bryon Wiegand, who is Director of the Division of Animal Sciences at University of Missouri in Columbia, is going to bring it back to Missouri for us after Daniel takes us on a whirlwind tour of, honestly, the world of shrimp. Daniel is an innovator with a company with a product. Is it still called Shrimp Box? Can I say that?
It is.
And he's going to tell you about kind of the cutting edge of protein production that is portable to anywhere on the planet in the form of shrimp, using the magic of shipping containers. But it's not just like the product offering, it's kind of the philosophy and the worldview behind it that I find so fascinating. And then after Daniel, Bryon didn't know he was a geography professor. But when we were talking about him potentially joining this panel, he gave me the biggest damn geography lesson of my life. Really centered in Missouri. It's kind of heartland, the meat production side of Missouri heartland. So I'm excited for this, and then we're going to go Q&A. So we're going to sit here and just talk like we're talking in our living room, except for it's much more inspiring. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. So that panel that we had in the fall inspired this video. So I decided that I just might as well just share it. It's short, I promise.
We live in strange times. Our relationship with food is complicated. The more we know about it, the less we enjoy it. We feel guilty about the impact of producing the very thing that sustains us. There has to be a better way. For over 10 years, Atarraya has been developing a realistic, scalable, and sustainable alternative to one of the most damaging and popular food staples on the planet: shrimp. In 2022, we shared our vision with the world, a vision which makes sense not in 10 or even 5 years, but right now. Here's a look back at what we've achieved this year. The American public met Shrimp Box, and they loved it. We refined our plug-and-play, hyper-modular, semi-automated farm that's up to 100 times more space efficient than traditional farming. It eliminates water discharge that harms the environment, and it cuts out antibiotics and preservatives, all while lowering production costs by 40% compared to any other inland alternative. In 6 months, we went from signing our warehouse lease to our first harvest. We proved that we can grow sustainable, local, and affordable shrimp with 3 times the shelf life anywhere in the world. And the world took notice. In 2023, we'll show how this solution scales in the United States. We'll build a template for a new food system which applies nature's wisdom to solve human challenges. A system that's transparent and inclusive, one that optimizes for efficiency, nutrition, and environmental impact, as well as our food growing and consumption experience. But we cannot do this alone. We want you to get involved. Visit www.atarraya.ai to learn more.
So this is our best shot at basically summarizing what the work we do. And I think that one of the reasons why Chris talks about our philosophy is because I've been working on this challenge for the past 17 years. I started working with economic development projects in the South Pacific coast of Mexico, in Oaxaca, which is the poorest state in our country. And it's been a very interesting and enlightening journey about what's wrong with our food system, right? And what are the challenges the people that are responsible for producing our food are facing. So, and we talk about a new food system, and we think that shrimp is a very good example of what's wrong, but also what can be done right. So we basically, our mission is to enable local shrimp farming anywhere in the world, and by then basically creating the first sustainable protein industry in the 21st century. So what's wrong with shrimp? And since we're in geography, this is a map. This is the map that I can present. And this is how seafood trade works, right? So we rely on a very complex network of trade in order to get our shrimp and our fish and most of our seafood. So, and that's a little bit ridiculous. If you think about, we don't rely on hunting buffaloes in the Midwest to get our burgers. So why are we hunting tuna in the middle of the Pacific to get our ceviche? So there are two ways for basically solving the shrimp need. One is wild catch, and shrimp, they don't swim. They basically walk in the ocean bed. So in order to get them, you basically need to throw a dragging net and destroy everything that comes with it. So if you would be conscious about, in order for you to really be conscious about the destruction that this brings, if you have let's say a 1 pound shrimp to share, you would need basically another 15 pounds bowl of other stuff that are dead that nobody's gonna eat ever in order for you to get our wild-caught shrimp. And then you have shrimp farming. So shrimp farming, basically everywhere you have a mature industry of shrimp farms, you basically see destruction. These are located basically by mangrove forests. Mangrove forests are very important ecosystems. They capture 5 times as much carbon than any other forest in the world. They are basically the nursery of many of ocean life. So, and it also, every shrimp farm discharges water on a scale comparable to a 500,000 people city. So, and both use allergenics that are basically dosed in Mexico or India or Ecuador, and farmers, they use typically 100 times the amount of potassium metabisulfite that the FDA considers safe. So, we decided that our goal was 12 years ago to be the first company to master the technology that will power the aquaculture industry forward. So, and then we created Shrimpbox. So Shrimpbox is basically, it's in the form of a shipping container. It was never a shipping container. Like these units have never been a shipping container because it's very complicated to manufacture 2 tanks in 1 shipping container. But it is in the geometry and with the specification of a 40-foot HQ shipping container, because then it's very cheap to move around. It has 2 tanks, and it yields 3,000 pounds of shrimp every year in 500 square feet, which would be, you would basically require about 2.5 acres in Ecuador to yield this. I made some calculations, and basically you would need about 80 acres of Shrimpbox to make St. Louis, Missouri self-sustainable in terms of shrimp. What else? So this is this was our first harvest in November. I hope that the video works. It doesn't. So, but trust me, this was a video of our VP Biotech Director that harvesting a bunch of shrimp. So so we have this farm in Indianapolis, so almost 4 hours from here. So now, if you want it, you can have locally raised shrimp from the Midwest. And our vision for Shrimpbox, it's not only to grow shrimp, but it's a regenerative and circular way of producing food. Why? Because Shrimpbox relies on a technology that is called biofloc. Biofloc, it's basically microbial communities that are constantly capturing the nitrogen that is created in the system. By this I mean, if you have ever had a fish tank in your house, you have your fish and then you feed it, and after 2 or 3 days, if there's a window, more so if there's a window close by, the water will start to get green. Because shrimp, they metabolize the protein through their gills. So they exhale, along with carbon dioxide, they exhale ammonia. So this ammonia is basically a fertilizer, and anywhere in the world there is microalgae that populates the water column, and this is why it gets green. So we as shrimp farmers, we don't care if the water gets green, but after a certain density is not the right word, concentration of ammonia, then it becomes toxic and it starts killing the shrimp. So traditional shrimp farming relies on getting rid of this water, like I used to do when I was 9 years old. But in the case, I used to drop the water into the toilet and then open the tap. In the case of traditional shrimp farming, both the toilet and the tap is the same, is the oceans. And on the way out, the problem is ecological, because they are dumping antibiotics, organic matter, sometimes pesticides. And on the way in, the problem is sanitary, because there's shrimp, they live in a never-ending pandemic, because there's no way that farmers can get rid of disease. So we don't do any water discharge. We have this microbial community that is constantly recycling the nitrogen, and sometimes we get, as a byproduct, we get a sludge of that biofloc. We collect that sludge, and then we feed that to a biodigester, and that biodigester creates methane, basically, that we burn it, and we heat the water that will go to the shrimp, and also we create bile, that is an organic fertilizer that is nutrition both for the plant and the soil. So in Oaxaca, we have a demo farm for regenerative demo farm, and our goal is that everywhere we have shrimp boxes farms, it's a force for good, because it can provide fertilization, and it can lead a regenerative approach to a food system, right? We want this to be an example and an inspiration, and we want people to get involved. In all of our videos, we say the same. You want to get involved? Please, we cannot do this alone. So, yes, that's our regenerative approach, and yeah, I didn't have the last. So, and now what we were able to do is, so our farm is basically inside a warehouse that we found, a very nice warehouse that we found in Indy. But now we have also a shrimp box that goes outside. We call it Elsa because we started it in the middle of the winter, and we were able to grow shrimp, tropical shrimp, outside the warehouse, basically using insulation, and we can grow tropical shrimp in the middle of the Midwest winter. So, and yeah, so our goal, I think it's very important. Our business model, we want to empower a new generation of shrimp farmers. So it's basically like contract farming, right? But also like a franchise, because we allow our farmers to go and get their own market if they are capable of. And yeah, so, and we are very happy to do it in the Midwest. We decided to do it in Indianapolis because, well, the government made a very good case for us choosing the state, but being in the Midwest without any access to ocean water was a very strong signal, a very strong proof that we can do it anywhere in the world, right? So right now we're in conversations with people in the Middle East, in Japan, and different parts of the United States, but we want the Midwest to be our stronghold for this new version of shrimp farming. Thank you.
How about that? So that's one form of a history, of a geography lesson. Bryon, what do you do, first of all, okay, and tell us how you think about kind of meat production from Missouri and beyond, and right back to Missouri.
So I have to front load this with when Chris called me, it was a number I didn't recognize and I almost didn't answer. But he said, you know, here's your opportunity to speak to the geography group, and I said, you do know you're talking to a meat scientist, right? Yes, this is good. All right. So just real quick, I'm a native of Missouri. I left for 20 years, came back. My original background is in quantitative genetics, and then I went to Iowa State and got a PhD in meat science and muscle biology. And my grandmother never understood what I did for a living. So I would just tell her I just wake up every day trying to make a better hot dog. That's not exactly true. I am heavily invested, have a family that's heavily invested in diversified farming, both from a traditional, conventional standpoint, but I really like to think in the forward thinking. My crystal ball is cloudy most days, but I think some of the things that I'll maybe present to you is just a very different lens to animal ag. I really appreciate being on the stage with animal ag today. And I was just waiting for that title slide to pop up so I can advance to the next. There we are. So here's the obligatory. There's going to be a lot of people on the globe in a very short period of time. What we have learned over the history of humankind, a number of things as I think about this from producing protein for humans. Global meat consumption is on a very large scale. If we think about just some historical perspective, we've certainly had populations within civilizations that choose not to use animal products, but one of the things we know to be true, that as humans become more affluent and they have more disposable income, they tend to add more and higher quality animal products to their diet to a certain extent. And we can look at some of the trends over time. And it really doesn't matter. A lot of this is cultural or religious based, and depending on if you're going to eat beef or pork or lamb or goat or shrimp, for that matter. I'm a big fan of the surf and like to raise the turf here in the home state of Missouri. Some things to think about as we look. The theme today, I think about container farming and urban agriculture and growing things inside. And I think that is, I'm all in. What's interesting to me in animal agriculture, as we consider moving the animals inside and growing them in efficient systems, there's often a disconnect. And there's a societal push that says maybe we shouldn't do that, which I think is an interesting thing to think about. So when I think about animal ag, and this is where Chris and I, on the very short phone call that I'm in my car, I said, I want you to think about something. Why do we grow livestock where we grow them? And then what are the implications going forward? Will we continue to grow livestock in those places? And we'll talk specifically about beef, since Missouri is a huge contributor to beef production in this country and globally when we think about exports. So we talk about where are the people. We know where the people are. They're the red spots are where the major contributions of population centers are. And as we leave Kansas City, Missouri, going west, we have seen historically we moved beef production towards the western states. Part of that is we raised cattle where there weren't people. And when we think about animal ag, we have seen this trend over my lifetime that we tend to move livestock away from people for a number of reasons. The beef specific piece, though, I think is very interesting to consider. I like to think of cattle as recyclers of sunshine and water. All right, sunshine grows the grass. The cattle, as a ruminant animal, can utilize forage that humans usually don't eat or won't eat, and they become good recyclers of this grass-based growth out into from the Midwest. And then as we moved to the western states, there were a number of reasons we did this. And this has some pretty significant implications for the future, I think. The humidity is much lower as we go into Kansas and Nebraska and eastern Colorado. The health of animals with lower humidity is a lot. I mean, if you think about it today, we walk outside, the humidity is high, it's uncomfortable. We talk about growing livestock in feedlots, for example. Some of those health considerations were, let's move the cattle to the west. All right, there it's away from people. We have big expanses of land. We can do this. One of the interesting things that happened, though, we grow the corn that we typically feed feedlot cattle. We were growing the corn in the Corn Belt, and we're sitting right in the middle of it, right? So what happened is, as the cattle moved to the west, we realized that trucking corn to the west was a problem, at least from a cost standpoint. So what do? We moved the corn production to those arid climates. And what happened when we moved those? We needed water. So we set up, lower left picture, center pivot irrigation. If you fly over the Midwest and the high plains, you see those circles from the airplane, and those are center pivot irrigation footprints. So we're growing corn out there, we have the cattle there, and that becomes a little bit of a problem for us, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But where are the cows? Okay, when I say where are the cows, where are the mothers of the calves that are born for beef production? And we in Missouri are either the number 2 or number 3 cow-calf producing state in this country. Texas will always be number 1 because they're so dang big. A lot of cattle in Texas. But Missouri and Oklahoma flip-flop for the other, those 2 other spots in the top 3. So we grow a lot of cows in small herds in this state. One of the unique things that happens, though, if we go to this one, where do the cattle end up? Or if we take total cattle inventory, we see a shift to the west. So those calves that are born in this state will find a home. The end of their production cycle usually is somewhere in a feedlot in the high plains. And notice California. California still has a very strong hold in the cattle industry. This also includes dairy cattle. California is still number 1 producer of dairy cows in the United States. A lot of people believe it's Wisconsin, but in fact it is not. So we've moved a whole industry over the last 40 years. Where are the cows in Missouri? All right, we do have some really interesting, if we think about where the glacier stopped, we have a lot of land in north central Missouri, but north of the Missouri River, highly fertile land. The glacier and peeled off, and we have a pretty good dump of topsoil up there. You'll notice that we don't have as many cows in North Missouri as we do Southwest Missouri. The Ozark region is much more conducive to raising cows and grass rather than raising row crops. So we have a really large concentration of cattle production in that part of the state. Where do we grow the corn? Well, we still grow the corn heavily in Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Ohio Valley. But if you look out there towards the west, there are some really big green squares in places like Kansas and Nebraska, and that's what's sitting under center pivot irrigation. The problem, well, not yet. There is a problem coming. If we think about farming practices, we think about erosion. What does that erosion look like? One of the big trends, we have taken a lot of grazing land out of production in this country, and I think that will continue. We've seen it incentivized by corn and soybean farming. It has been fairly productive and profitable in recent decades. So we have plowed a lot of land that we may not. It's highly erodible in many cases if we look at what our Farm Service Agency provides us in that case. So we're not grazing as many acres as we once were. We're farming those with corn and soybean production. But one of the trends that we're seeing, how many of you in the room would say you eat beef once a week? At least. Okay. How many of you think it's still too damned expensive? Okay. We have a really interesting storm that is coming in the beef industry. All right, look at the trend lines here. This is 1981 to today in the beef cattle inventory in this country. So the number of female cattle in production has declined pretty much. If we wanted, we could draw a pretty straight line through that decline, right? And so we have the smallest number of female cows in this country, but we are still producing more beef than we ever have from a tonnage standpoint. All right, you say, well, is that efficiency? It's partly efficiency. We're growing those animals to a larger size in the same period of time. We've selected them for genetic merit. The top line is beef carcass weight. Probably not something you think about every day of the week, but I do, okay? In 1980, the average beef carcass weighed 650 pounds. That's both sides hanging on the rail. As we approach 2025, look at that increase. 866, if we look at USDA's data from Friday, last week, 866 pound carcass. Somebody said something about bison. there's the bison trend line. We started collecting that data as well. So what we're seeing is a decline in numbers, but an increase in the total size of the animal. So it doesn't take as many animals to make this huge increase in beef. Here's where we run into a problem. And if you spend any time talking to people in the beef industry, the question becomes, what about water? All right, we went to the West because the cattle perform there better. Their respiratory health is better because there's not as much humidity and the heat doesn't work on them as much. But then we end up with depleted water. And if we look at the aquifers that sit under the states where we raise beef cattle, we see a big decline from 1900, and this is out to 08, but the decline is real and it's continued. So then the question is, what do we do if we want to continue to have beef production in this country? What does the model look like? And there are going to be some challenges, and some of these challenges are really grand because they get at the social piece of our how we perceive animal agriculture. And this is a picture from the Iowa Cattlemen's Association, and one of the big pushes that we've seen is, can we mitigate heat stress? Can we mitigate a humid climate like we have in Missouri? Can we bring production and finishing of cattle and other species? We already do that a lot. Poultry and pork production are heavily produced in integrated systems. But can we do this with cattle as well? Is it enough to put shade over them? Can we tunnel ventilate the building? Can we move the air? All these kinds of things, and grow them in a system like you see on the screen. The short answer is yes. But the pushback that we get is, well, I don't know if I want to see those animals growing in those highly confined systems. I don't maybe understand that. What about the health of the animal? What about the welfare of the animal? Those are all real concerns. And we work, in my life now, we work in this very heavily to try to find the optimization. I don't think we need to maximize either end of this equation. We have some interesting things that have happened in making animal protein and alternative proteins for human consumption. I got a call in 2019 that said, would you please come and give the fake meat talk? I said, sure. What are we talking about? You know, the plant-based and the bioreactor-grown meat. So I did my homework. You would probably think, well, a meat scientist is probably going to advocate for his industry. He probably doesn't want to go give that talk. I've given that talk 27 times in public now, and I'm happy to have the conversation because I think about providing protein for people, right? Said that right off the top. Whether it's plant-based or animal-based, protein is important to the be-all, end-all of our nutritive existence, right? So we have some challenges that I think are very interesting, and here's the cartoon version of how we have laboratory-grown meat that still requires a bovine cell to grow beef, and it is in a system with a bioreactor, and it's continuing